Hello and welcome to the Print Monthly podcast, here to give you a rundown of everything that's happened in and around the world of print. I'm David Osgar, editor of Print Monthly and SignLink, and I'm joined once again by our commissioning editor, Jonathan Pert.
Hey.
How have you been?
Well, it's been a busy one, actually. I've been to quite a few events and there's a lot more coming up. One of the recent ones was Heidelberg. They had an open day. They were showing off the Jetfire 50 and all the new stuff that they've been putting forward with that, including some updates to Pronect Touch Free, which is their kind of automation workflow software. So lots of very cool stuff happening. The event season is really kind of kicking back off again, so it's been great.
Yeah, a lot of manufacturers releasing equipment, whether that's before FESPA, which we'll talk about later, or just in general for, as people have got their spending back with the financial year, so restarting financially, etc. So yeah, I think all of that makes sense. Myself, obviously, as well, as we'll talk about later, got to go to Amsterdam to see some Mimaki equipment. So yeah, there's been a lot of different releases happening, which has been quite fun. And to follow up from last time as well, Mark Stevenson has officially announced now.
Yes,
he has got the Spark organization, so
which is exciting. He kind of, when I was speaking to him for the Q&A that we did, he kind of teased it. He said that he might be putting something together based on his old nickname, which is Mark the Spark.
Yes.
And yeah, now he's basically just bringing his kind of personal brand of corporate storytelling to the wider print public. So it's not just Fujifilm anymore. It's basically whoever wants to collaborate with him, which is exciting.
And Goodie's already got collaborations happening with the likes of Colin McDermott, the online print coach. You got Print Island, the print show. So yeah, already IPIA. He's got a lot of collaborations and projects he's working on. So yeah, it's good to see that follow up from when we spoke to him. But we'll crack on with what's in the news this time. There's a lot to talk about. Just like last time, there's been a lot of big stories in terms of restructuring and changes in different businesses. There's been quite a lot of installation news as well. But the biggest one is the first one we're going to talk about today.
Yes, so we already spoke last time about Xerox and the fact that they were, putting together a new global restructure to try and eliminate redundancies. Well, this has been part of a long story of Xerox share prices. I don't know how else to put it, plummeting, to be honest. In the last few years, their share price has really gone down. And I wrote an article quite recently about the fact that their shares have got down to $1.30, which is about £1. And in fact, I just checked just before recording. Currently, as of writing, it's at $1.26. And you keep in mind that a few years back they had share prices of $8-9 a share. If you go back 5-10 years, you're talking $50-60 a share. Wow. So it's a huge change, and a lot of it is to do with the fact that they have made these big bets, and at least according to what the stock market is kind of reflecting, some people feel that those bets were the wrong ones. They bet on the wrong horse. So they had their gigantic Lexmark acquisition. You're talking like a $1 billion acquisition there. Just trying to, it seemed a really smart idea to unite basically the Chinese version of Xerox, a kind of really big player in multifunction printers and scanners, and bring that together with Xerox. But there's some rumblings about whether Xerox was actually in the financial position to make that kind of acquisition. But then also there are certain people that are basically saying that Xerox at some point needed to pivot away from their core output being in the kind of multifunction, office desktop printer realm. Most of the companies that we're seeing that are doing really well in the kind of print manufacture side, most of them are moving into much more commercial and industrial realms. And Xerox, of course, they have their own commercial and industrial printers, but their core focus has been on multifunction. And a lot of people are saying, well, they maybe bet on the wrong horse. Anyway, this came to a head. We had Steve Bandovchak, hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. Sorry, Steve, who was the previous CEO. He resigned with immediate effect and he was replaced by Louis Pasteur, who is the previous chief operating officer.
Okay.
And basically, the idea is that Louis hopefully is kind of righting the ship and bringing through changes that a lot of shareholders are after. So we will see.
Yeah, it's been a big one. Like I said, it's even for, I think, people obviously who would have followed this for many years, who would have known more about the history of Xerox, but then there's just the name itself, as you sometimes get reminded, is, especially in the States, people saying, "Oh, Xerox that over to me."
Exactly.
And, that
it's like as ubiquitous as Hoover or something like that.
Exactly. So I think while that's not as much of a sort of name here as, especially in America, where they apply that to all sorts of things like pharmaceuticals and stuff, they use the brand name. I think it does show that, a lot of people would be familiar with that brand and would know what its speciality is in. So I think even as an outsider for myself, looking at an acquisition like the Lexmark one, you do think, oh, okay, well, that makes sense, but it is still within that same realm. So like you said, even to take an example of what else we're talking about briefly today with Muto and Brother, you can see there having been in that kind of like desktop sort of industry, but also having like garment solutions, having projectors, having now a wide format kind of like arm. It shows that diversification, which you don't see as much with Xerox. And while yes, they can be the sort of big player in one area, there is a lot of competition, which you see from the likes of Ricoh, Canon, and some offices are shrinking, they're changing the way they're operating. So I think,
I mean, I saw some kind of analysis on it, and a lot of people are saying that often it's a choice between do you kind of widen your scope, or do you double down? And with Xerox, a lot of the thinking a few years back was, well, we just don't quite have the reach, we don't quite have the the network we want, we don't quite have the output, but the core concept of what we put forward is fine. And the idea was that the Lexmark acquisition was supposed to prove that. But then a lot of people that are shareholders maybe don't agree, maybe feel like Xerox needed to potentially many years ago diversify more strongly and in a wider way, but we'll see.
And I guess because of that sort of big part it's got in America and the stock element of it, that's attracted worldwide attention in terms of this story, in terms of where people are reading about it. But especially from the comments we've seen, I think there's a lot of people who might work for Xerox in America, or there might be people over here which are kind of monitoring it. So we've seen this story be quite popular when we've posted it on LinkedIn. We've had quite a few comments from the likes of Barney Wiggins, who just said he was not surprised by this. You've got James Smith, who commented that senior leadership was the main redundancy here. So they feel that obviously there's a lot of blame there in terms of how things have been operated. Another person said that it's sad to see, but they weren't surprised. Somebody else agreeing with them. Lance Redler added that he loves this company. He's been connected to it in some way, whether it's an employee or a dealer, for 35 years. But he does say they are dying of self-inflicted wounds, which is quite harsh words there. Somebody else commented just simply to what he said, truth. And then you have got from the other side, or I guess more internally, Matthew Henry, which I believe works for Xerox, saying for all the challenges and those who are still working at Xerox, it maintains industry-leading positions in managed print services, digital production print, and workspace solutions. Those are the facts. We continue daily to put our customers first and take care of issues. I don't post on here very often, but where I work still has the people and tech that are second to none. The people that are still here believe in seeing something through as best they can. Which I think, obviously is shown in, again, their products. Often when we do stories about new Xerox products, they're quite popular.
Absolutely.
And I think that definitely what he's saying in terms of that managed print service element, the production print side, the workspace solutions, that is all still very relevant and is still an area that they are very prominent in. As you said, it's whether they continue to double down on that, or whether they can diversify. It depends on the way they want to do it.
The other misnomer is to assume that because a company has done really bad, in terms of their share price, so that must mean that they are a bad company, and yes, maybe there's some bits of mismanagement, maybe there are decisions that were made that shouldn't have been made. That's the part that's up for debate. But Xerox is a gigantic company. There are many parts of it, and some of them are at a very high level still, and behind every company of that size, there are many, individuals who are working very hard, who might put their entire life to working for that company, and it doesn't devalue what they've done and what they've achieved and their output and skill set.
No, yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, like I said, it's that leadership change, which is probably going to be, quite critical as well for some people. And yeah, we'll continue to see how that one works out. Another big story, or sort of kind of series of stories, or just rumblings, I guess, is the fact that we're building up now to FESPA this year. So while there hasn't been necessarily, one big story talking about this, there's been a lot of coverage for us across our different titles, our different platforms, etc. So we've had our FESPA preview, which has gone into the latest edition of SignLink, which you can check out, which has a nice themed cover for Barcelona, and then there's been lots of news coming from the show itself in terms of the different areas that will be seen, the exhibitors which will be there, and a lot of that has been drip fed gradually, but now is a good time, I think, as seen with the preview, and I was putting that together, to kind of combine all of that and say, right, what does this look like as a whole, and what can people expect to see, and how can they best navigate it? So for people who are unaware, or sort of know that they're going but don't yet know each sort of element, the sort of main sort of headlines this year is the fact that they've got essentially 6 co-locating shows. So in the past, it's always been kind of seen as FESPA Global Print Expo, co-located with European Sign Expo, and then it might have like smaller sections within it. But this year, they tend to be seeing it more as FESPA is the kind of like the show, and then you've got the 6 individual shows within that. So that includes then the Global Print Expo, which is still the largest part of it, because it can obviously encompass so many different elements. You then have European Sign Expo, which again has been running for several years, and then will be more specific to people who are providing signage solutions, but might also have some people which overlap into the 2 areas in terms of wide format print. You've then got the personalization experience, which is kind of integrated with the European Sign Expo. And also kind of combined with textile as well, because that personalization experience is obviously very relevant to textile because of personalizing t-shirts and that kind of stuff. So that'll be another element. Then you got Wrap Fest, which is the first time this is taking place at the European show. So in the past, that's been it was a sort of debut event for the UK in Silverstone, and ran there as a dedicated vehicle wrap-in show. And now this will be the first time that it's going to the sort of European market. And within that, of course, then you have World Wrap Masters, which is a very popular competition. It's very fun. It gets all these people from different countries and get to see who is the sort of the winner of their competitions. And then the 2 brand new ones are Corrugated, which is looking at the sort of corrugated display and packaging side of things, and then Textile, as I mentioned, with personalization experience, which I guess has had different variations over the years. They had like sportswear, I think they tried to focus on in previous years. And then there's been like the textile area or the textile lounge, or different versions of it, whether it's been kind of only like sort of conference areas or just like demonstration areas. But this year it does have a dedicated exhibition space. So those are the 6 shows which you can get at Fira de Barcelona, which is where it's taking place this year. So it's been quite a long time since they've had FESPA take place in Spain, and I guess that's quite relevant in the sense of like where you're seeing certain markets change. The sort of Germany and the Netherlands has been very good for them so far, because again, that's where a lot of that kind of like production print and sort of commercial side is very popular and has a lot of growth. Whereas Spain has got more of a history, again, maybe more in the textile side, and especially like garment production and stuff like that. And I think they're starting to see some growth again in some of these, new and growing areas. So it'll be interesting how that plays into it. And I guess hopefully they're going to see, after a few years of being traditionally in Germany or the Netherlands, that people still flock to, a different country, not having to, in some cases, for some customers, only cross one border or something like that. Right. Whereas we know for UK visitors, they're flying to a different country regardless. So it'll be interesting to see then how the visitor numbers change, if they get a bigger proportion of people from, say, Spain, Portugal, maybe even Africa. We shall see. The tagline for this one is the place for experts. So again, focusing very much on that fact that they're bigging up the diversification of everyone who's going to these shows. Printers, sign makers, they are going into all these different markets. That's why they are holding these as separate shows, because they are seeing growth within those markets, and more people are looking for, products and materials and machinery that can give them solutions in that sense. So the place for experts works quite well in that sense, because I think they're saying, well, if you want to know about corrugated, go here. There's a bunch of conferences dedicated in the corrugated section. If you want to find out more about textile, same thing. You can go there. You can have demonstrations. There'll be a range of experts there as well.
Yeah, I think it reflects quite well the diversity of, like, the modern kind of signage and wide format market. That as a modern sign maker, you might be asked to do packaging or vehicle wraps or textile and garment, and so we don't know if that's going to reflect or be confusing in terms of the marketing message. We'll see, when we get there, if it's just as busy as it has been in previous years, but it does seem to accurately reflect the market, I think.
Yeah, and I think from exhibitors, definitely a lot of them still see it as, this is just FESPA, do you know what I mean? So regardless of like how much you break it up into different areas, I think that might help from like a visitor point of view. But largely for a lot of these exhibitors, they just want to be at that show, and they'll choose where they exhibit and which section they want to be in. But I think even for some visitors, they might just go there, and as we'll see, we'll see if it is a case of like, oh, I'm in corrugated now, or will it just feel like you are just a part in the same show, which in some cases might not matter too much, but I think overall it just shows that they are, rather than nestling in these people and people go in there and be like, oh, I didn't realize that corrugated companies were here or textile companies were here. So it just emphasizes the point that they are focusing on those areas as headline areas, especially, like you said, within specialty print, as they put it, rather than something like Drupa, which can have like big companies like Heidelberg, which are going to, of course, have like massive machines and are more targeted towards high volume printers. This is very much focusing on the specialty market, which, like you said, can have various different types of products and solutions that they're providing. And you're seeing that with a lot of the exhibitors, Agfa, Mimaki, Roland, Durst, Antalis, Epson, all of them are going there with like a wide variety of different things. Epson's stand last year, had a lot of these like, banners above them saying, textile, wide format, and I think that will definitely be a case this year, is that you'll see a lot of these exhibitors sort of, even though FESPA will be broken up into different parts, the stands will be broken up into different parts to show the different parts of their portfolio, which makes it a bigger value show, I think, as well. Keep an eye on our channels on YouTube, especially. We'll be having lots of video coverage when we're there. And if you want to get the complete lowdown on what will be at FESPA, do check out that FESPA preview on the latest edition of SignLink. So very different from that. Now we are going to the worlds of AI and software.
Yeah. Although this again came from actually a SignLink feature. So originally when I found out about it, I was writing the AI and signage feature for SignLink, and kind of got the lowdown before it was officially launched of Fiery's new software called Fiery Scribe. It's an AI prepress software. So it's actually it's very smart the way it works. It's super automated, and it can analyze email requests and then determine and apply print specs before printing. and it does that by just literally analyzing the email and understanding what's being said. So it's a large language model, but used for a very specific purpose. It can learn from past jobs to improve accuracy. So the whole point is that it's supposed to be, building and growing with you. So you can give it corrections, and then it should be able to learn from that. And yeah, like I said, we spoke to Fiery for the AI signage feature. And there, when I spoke to them, they were saying that they don't incorporate AI just for the sake of it. Obviously, it's like a massive buzzword, so everyone and their dog is, trying to bring out some kind of bit of AI software. But they were saying that they only utilize it when it can solve real world problems.
Yeah, well, especially that element of, taking it from an email request. Yeah. I think that's the one that stood out to me, is the fact that, there's a lot of prepress software out there which does a lot of great stuff in terms of making it a lot easier from that process of it going to print, and not having to sort out files and that kind of stuff. But I think it's the idea of it actually, not even needing that person to kind of process the order, that it would take it just directly from email.
Exactly.
So again, there, I guess it raises questions as to, are you making it so that people can be busy elsewhere, or you kind of eliminating staff and that kind of stuff? And it probably is suited to certain types of businesses. We were just talking about, a lot of wide format and signage with FESPA, so probably not so much those type of people, but maybe a lot of people who have like a lot of regular work and commercial type businesses, which will be stuff that doesn't need sort of tinkering or changing as much. And as to how much Fiery can do that, I guess, is for the printers to see. But it's interesting to see that change of automation going to that level, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, my personal opinion is if it's something that is number crunching and it is on the more boring side, then great, so long as, those printers then utilize their stuff for something more creative rather than just kind of bidding them off,
Yeah.
But we will see. I mean, that's kind of the point of this software. Fiery, I'm sure, have ideas of how it can be used, otherwise they wouldn't have created it. Yeah. But then once it goes out to market, that's when the market itself kind of determines its usage.
So we've mentioned about product releases and stuff as well, and we've mentioned about FESPA. This is a product that will be shown at FESPA for the first time. Mimaki has just unveiled its new UJV 200 series. So that includes the UJV 200-160 and UJV 200-130, which are roll-to-roll printers, and as I mentioned, will be debuted for the first time at FESPA.
Mimaki are great with very catchy names.
Yes, yeah. And I guess it's, because they have so many solutions and so many like types of printers, I guess that's where they don't want to have too many different sort of nicknames for them.
There's supposed to be a kind of code, right, for each one that you can actually just look at the name and figure out exactly what it does.
So this comes off the back of like where the 200 series being the kind of sort of entry level engine, which has a lot of the properties of the 300, which they also had another release recently, which was like the 330 series, which has a lot of other features and is very good at like handling specific types of materials or more difficult ones. So the 200 series has a lot of elements of the 300, but just doesn't operate at quite the same level. But what they're saying, or sort of quoting it as, is high quality print at an attractive price.
Yes.
And they're very much focusing on these small sign shops. So again, rather than going to your big commercial printers or big wide format signage companies, this is very much a solution for those kind of like localized high street sign shops and print shops, which are supplying to local schools, local businesses, and they've seen a lot of success with that. I think the CJV 200 is one of their most popular and best-selling products, and that's a solvent machine. So as you said, with that sort of naming in mind, the solvent is the CJV, and then you got their sublimation line, which is the TS 200. Right. So then this is then the UV version of those. So as opposed to solvent printing, you've got a UV element with the UJV 200 series. And yeah, it's just bringing, high quality print production. They quote, saying that it has, streak free prints, smooth gradients, solid colors. And from speaking to, our Ian Everset, which you can see our interview with him on the SignLink YouTube channel as well, he's quite confident that there are other printers by unnamed competitors which don't reach that level of quality, in which, like, yes, you can do all the things that machine does, but the fact that it's able to bring in such smooth gradients and such solid colors at that price range, they believe is quite unique.
Yeah, because I wasn't there. It was you that was there and you that interviewed Arjen, but I got to edit the video, so I'm a little bit clued up on it. And yeah, you said it was a combination of solid colors, but with high fidelity,
Yes.
for very small details at the same time. I guess Mimaki, their big thing right now is that they are hitting that mid market. They're not making entry level machines because the quality is too high for entry level, but they're bringing that quality to a more affordable level.
That's it.
And in a sense, I guess if you spoke to a Mimaki dealer, they would say that they're democratizing, in terms of what can be offered.
Yeah, and very much speaking to Ian and going to that event, which was like a media preview essentially of this press before it's kind of officially debuted at FESPA. It's all about just what do our customers need, and how can we help them. So rather than sort of telling them like, well, you need this, they are listening to the industry and to their customers. And again, go back to what FESPA, we were talking about with FESPA, it's answering those sort of like needs and what people are wanting. Yeah. They want something that's, especially in these shops, like takes up, doesn't take up too much room, and roll to roll, which is useful if it's people who don't do sort of like work on, flatbed machines. But then when you talk about the 330 one, it is something that can turn into that. It's got foldable tables that can be tucked away and then can be brought back out again. So yeah, they very much see that they're focusing on that particular market. They're offering a lot of solutions, and they can, produce products and materials and the types of prints which they weren't able to do before, which is of, high value to a lot of customers. So yeah, once again, shows again the diversity and the sort of range of different types of technologies which we're seeing in the market.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, that sort of covers off like our sort of main stories. We've had quite a few other like updates from stuff we've previously covered and sort of other big stories.
Yeah, there's quite, it's just been a busy time the last month. We spoke previously about Brother potentially purchasing Muto. Well, that has now been completed in a £170 million deal, or 35 billion yen as it actually was. So that's all complete. We also had Drupa launching a new digital platform with Printing United. So it's basically a new version of Drupa's global trends report, which they used to put out periodically. So that's now going to be as an ongoing digital format rather than a periodical release. And yeah, exciting stuff. Lots of insights that they're going to be putting forward with that. We've also seen the managing director at Zebra Print, who we got the chance to actually do a Q&A with recently. She has won Leader of the Year and Manufacturing Leader of the Year at the Yorkshire Leadership Awards. So not a print-specific award show, literally for Yorkshire. So that's very impressive. And then we've also, in the last month or so, had a statement from Print Scotland that was quite interesting. They were basically talking about the fact that apprentices in Scotland, print industry apprentices, are being offered on average around £3,200 of training contribution, while as those same print industry apprentices in England are being offered 10,000. So literally just where your postcode is, or whether you're Scottish or English, is having a massive impact on the training contribution that's being put forward. Obviously, they are asking for that to change. Understandable why. But yeah, very interesting.
Well, that's why, I think that it reflects a lot of what's going on in terms of the next generation, which we often talk about in terms of getting young people into print and, training. And as we were saying, with different machines and stuff like that, but like, how do you teach these people, where they're utilized? What is their perception of print? Is it, showing them the technology side, the automation side, And they're going into so many different areas, like labels, which would be a big thing in Scotland as well, with so many of their Scottish products that they produce there. But yeah, you see it also with wide format print, commercial print. So definitely quite relevant, and addresses why I guess a lot of people's frustrations are in the UK in terms of whether spending and priorities are being answered in all parts of the UK. So yeah, in this week's In the Know, I decided to speak to Richard McCombe, who is the Vice President of Print Scotland and is the Managing Director of Graphic Warehouse. So I was able to find out more about this story. Okay, so we are here with Richard McCombe to speak more about the Print Scotland story that has recently been talked about, which is to do with apprenticeship funding. So, Richard, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And for those who don't know, what can you just introduce your role at Print Scotland, but also then Graphic Warehouse, I guess, as your main business?
The Managing Director of Graphic Warehouse. We're a family-run business, and I also have a position on the board of Print Scotland. So Print Scotland is about a 120-year-old print federation. It's had a couple of different names over the years, and I'm currently the vice president. Second time I've been vice president. I couldn't take on the presidency the last time, and I suppose what I bring to the table is my, call it passion for businesses investing in young people. So in our business, we have about 7% of our shop floor staff are under 25, I think, at the moment. And we've done that. It was an initiative started probably before COVID, because I was frustrated, shall we say, with bringing people in from the industry. We're an unusual industry in large format print, because okay, we manufacture flags, banners, signage, we distribute across the UK. But we were recruited from either the signage industry or from the print industry, and there seemed to be a bit of a blur in there. So yeah, we just decided we're going to start recruiting our own young people and training them on how we thought we should be training them, and tying that in with the model apprenticeship program so that they learn what we need them to learn in the way that we expect them to perform. And then also ensuring that they get qualifications, which gives them points through their SQA, so the Scottish Qualifications Authority. And it's about the equivalent of hire. So, 3 hires and you can move on to university. And I don't think that a lot of the young people really valued that. I think they thought it was just a course that they could get. But in actual fact, they're more realizing that, it's really good for their self-esteem, because they realize that you're not just left school and went taking something that doesn't materialize in the long term. And we were just lost an apprenticeship. We were one of our graduate apprentices, and he's went off to train to be a gas engineer. But he's been with us for 5 years, and he's really grown. It's amazing to watch. And I've got other ones in here, but one was 19. He's been off to China 3 times in the last 18 months. It's unbelievable. And he hadn't left his bedroom for a year after finishing school. So to see them grow like that, and their problem solving is completely different to my approach. But it's quite refreshing as well. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying it's hugely rewarding and so beneficial to your business. So one of the things that I researched through Print Scotland is that Print Scotland offers the training provision for the model apprenticeships. That's one of the ways it makes its funding. And over the last 10 years, it's become more and more challenging. And then I went away and I did some research, and I found that in England, it started at 10,000. And you're going, well, why is it in Scotland there's such a big disparity? So in Scotland, we have things like free prescriptions, and I say free, right? We'll put everything in inverted commas. We have free prescriptions, we have free further education, and And I think a lot of the focus has been on, let's drive our young people down the formal education route. And it's just not for everybody. Quite often they've left school because they're disengaged and they're not going into further education because they just don't think they can do it. But it's just because they haven't found their own pathway. And I've got a 19-year-old running Zund, Sumacata, lamination, Colorado, two die sub printers. Now, I'm not saying he's the norm, right? He's just picked it up and he's ran with it. I'm concerned that a lot of businesses don't think it's worth the effort, but it's also not just worth the effort for them. It becomes the barriers to recruiting young people are pretty challenging as well, because one, we have to find them, and then when we find them, we have to interview them. And I usually do group interviews, so I'll maybe bring 10, 12 into a group interview, do a tour of the factory, tell them about what we do, how we do it. I'm pretty proud of our factory. It's immaculate. We buy shadow boards, we use manufacturing processes. We teach them the 8 wastes of lean manufacturing, so they're looking for ways of continually improving, and they are coming back to us and saying, I would like to do this. I mean, these are all parts of the investment that we're making into these young people, and there's very little to encourage from the government to encourage young people, to encourage businesses to recruit young people so we can develop our own workforce. And I think in the print industry, maybe not so much the signage industry, but in the print industry, average age of somebody working in there is about 55. We have 10 years left. 10 years left. And we don't have that skill anymore. So maybe we were slightly ahead of the game. In that, recruiting young people has to be an absolutely pivotal part of your growth strategy, even your survival strategy, I think. We deal a lot with the print industry. And I'm very concerned about the print industry because I think a lot of the people that are in there, it's almost fighting for survival rather than fighting to adapt and grow. A lot of technology is pretty old. We were last autumn, we were at a horse racing event. I don't really go to I'll stick my neck out, I'll go to this. And I went to it with the agenda of, let's get around and speak to everybody and find out what they think about technology and AI and how that's going to influence their business. So you're standing in there having a pint, it all seems very kind of, but in actual fact, the more sinister side of me was like, what are people actually thinking? And they didn't have a clue. And it's terrifying. We built an AI-driven app that is currently plugged into WhatsApp, our customer service ticket system, the online chat. It then connects to our ERP and CRM system, and that will then go to large language models and agents, and then back to large language model and output the answer to a question. So, for example, I need 10 banners that are going outside a school or outside schools. They are 750 millimeters high, they're 7 meters long, and it says, do not park in the zigzags. How much will this cost? And it will come back with a price in about 30 seconds. And then it will give you a link, and the link basically takes you to your shopping basket. It's there in your shopping basket, but you can ask it technical questions as well. So I've got a 2 meter by 5 meter banner. It's going on railings. What do you suggest? Traditionally, people want to speak to somebody and get that answer quite quickly, but we have to adapt to people that are coming up through their 20s and their 30s who are going to be used to using this technology. But it's also important you keep hand in hand with that human contact where they can phone up and they can have a chat with you, but also trying to find ways of creating that information efficiently. So we've been gathering all this information, looking for what the questions are, and this doesn't work like when you go into the bank and say, I'd like to close my credit card because I've now paid it off. It comes back with those static responses all the time where you just start banging with your keyboard. I want to speak to a real person. I want to speak to a real person. These are real life questions that are intelligent and can respond exactly how you put your inputs in. There's a lot there. And, we have to be mindful of age demographics as well as how people want to interact with us. But you don't get the barriers from young people that you would get from maybe somebody else.
No, it shows how it all ties in. It's like you said, me and Jonathan were talking about, Fiery releasing their, AI prepress, and the fact that they the software you were talking about, it can take it literally from the inbox, so it's not even processed at all. As soon as that email comes in, it takes it and, it sends it to print straight away. And as you said there about robotics, I know that Key Point Intelligence are, one of the kind of sponsors of FESPA this year, and a lot of people will be going there and looking at how they can upgrade their technology. And I know they've been doing research into robotics, how many people are looking at adopting it, and the numbers at the moment are quite low. And I think it's like you said, it's that kind of fear, or a lot of people like waiting for other people to sort of make the move before they decide whether they do it. But I think hopefully, like you said, the likes of Print Scotland or some of these software companies, or shows like FESPA, can kind of show people like, well, these are the big talking points, these are the themes that are happening: AI, robotics, automation, young people. And hopefully, like you experienced with that event, hopefully a lot of people eventually get the message, or there will be those leaders and those front running companies that are ahead of the curve in that sense. And it's whether the other people can catch up or not. But I guess it all works together, isn't it? We need those young people to use the technology, and you need to have the technology there in order for the business, the print industry to remain relevant. And like the pandemic, it's just whether, there's those who you don't adapt, and there's, those who don't. I think it all ties in together. Lastly, then, is there any advice you would give to then, like you were saying earlier, about whether people are put off apprenticeships because of costs, or just investing in young people? Like you said, it's a very important thing, and to yourself and to your business, and something you've been passionate about. Is there advice you give to other printers about investing in that talent and in apprenticeships?
You're not going to get instant results, and don't expect to have instant results. I have done this for so long now that went through the apprenticeship recruitment. We didn't want to do it. This is maybe 14 years ago. Went back, recruited people from the industry, thinking this is the best way to do it. I didn't like that either. We went back to apprenticeships, and we've done it properly this time. Go and find schools. Go and find the local developing young people. Developing young workforce at the DYW. Go to the colleges. Have open days. I've had 130 kids at least through this building in the last 12 months. Tell them that this industry exists. Look for the ones that maybe are not going to go down an academic route, but are good with their hands or problem solving. Look for young people that are interested in your business. But you need to be quite ruthless at the beginning. If they're not going to turn up on time, if they're not going to follow instructions, if they're not going to work safely, they're not for you. So I know we have to give them opportunities, but if they can't follow instructions and turn up on time, that's a big complaint. Don't get too hung up on telephones, mobile phones. You're wasting your energy. Right? You are not going to change that. You just have to know that, as long as they're staying on task and they're getting their work done and they're learning and they're still moving along in a program, they're not going to work the same way as you. Just accept it and suck it up. My youngest brother was at a bit of a downer last year, saying, I want to do something that really kind of impacts society. And I took him out on the shop floor, and I was like, this is all the kids nobody wanted. And look at what they can do. It's unbelievable. I would highly recommend it.
Amazing, yeah. And yeah, like you said, very important to point out that generational difference, isn't it? Like, yeah, they might be on their phones more, but it is when they can look up from those phones, that is the times in which, oh, it must be something impressive. Do you know what I mean? Or they could be using their phone for work, or they could be like trying to find answers, etc. So it's thinking outside the box. But Yeah, thank you, Richard, for joining us. Lots of great advice there and more information about the stories we're discussing. So yeah, we look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Excellent. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, so it was great speaking to Richard there and finding out his thoughts on that story about the differences in Scotland regarding print apprentices, and to get his thoughts a bit more on some of the trends we're seeing in the industry. But that takes us on to our final part of the episode, which is In the Spotlight, where we like to just talk about something which we've been covering, something a bit unique or interesting. And this time it is something quite unique.
So this is one that I wrote recently for SignLink. I actually just found it in the general news. But I just thought it was very, very funny. So basically, there is a shop in Swansea called Exotica Foods, and it recently received an apology letter from a former foolish student who basically had stolen their giant PVC sign from outside of their shop. And this happened 15 years ago. And basically, clearly, the guy had or girl, we don't know, had a crisis of conscience and sent this apology letter with £100 in cash, which the owner of the shop said was not even close to how much the actual signage costed, but still a nice thing. The funniest part for me was actually some of the quotes from the shop owner. He was saying, so he said, "We were ticked off when it got taken, but it was secured with ties and it was massive and heavy. We were like, fair play." Yes. So the image of this drunken former, student, well, I guess student at the time, maybe from Swansea University, who basically managed to drag this gigantic sign home is quite funny.
Yeah, it's quite funny to me as well, because for the record, it wasn't me, but I did go to Swansea to study my undergrad.
Oh, really? How long ago was that?
Yeah, it was about 15.
Yeah, well, there we go.
But yeah, no, I and that's why I think when I looked it up on maps, I was like, I don't recognize the shop specifically, but I know that kind of area. Yes, yeah. But I went to what was then known as Swansea Met, which is now University of Wales, Trinity St David. Is combined with a few different ones. So I'm going to say they were a Swansea University student and not from the university I went to. But it sounds like something that would have happened there. I can remember a few, walking back from Wine Street, as is the popular destination for students there. And yeah, I remember once just look at my shoes the next day, be like, why is there all styrofoam in my boots? And it was obviously outside a shop in which there was a bunch of styrofoam all on the floor. So I can imagine they'd be going through to see but it was the fact it was on there and they had to take it down. It wasn't like it was falling down.
No. Yeah, it hadn't fallen down or anything. Yeah. They'd just seen it and somehow in their drunkenness thought, oh, this is going to be a great thing to do. But I guess it's just added to the pantheon of kind of drunken escapades. There's the really famous one where someone stole a Dalek out of a museum that was doing a Doctor Who exhibition and managed to get it to the top of Glastonbury Tor. I don't know if they ever figured out who actually was the culprit of that one, but it was an extremely heavy Dalek, and they were baffled as to how they managed to get it up there. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's it for this episode. Good to end on a lighter note there compared to some of the more kind of complex and serious things we were discussing in the news, but we still had a lot of big releases and information with FESPA, etc. So probably in the next episode we'll be just about to go to FESPA, which will be exciting. So there might be a lot more product releases or news in build up to that. But as mentioned, you can check out our preview in SignLink magazine, and you can also check out some of the news stories that we were discussing there and many others. But yeah, to view more and keep up to date, you can follow us on LinkedIn and on YouTube at Print Monthly, or we also mentioned our sister publication SignLink quite a bit there, so you can follow that at the same places, or you can follow both publications at printmonthly_SignLink on Instagram if you want to keep up with some of the videos and the sort of trips we're going on, etc. To keep up with this podcast, then you can listen and follow on all good podcast players, including Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and YouTube. So yeah, that's it for this episode, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you then.
Bye-bye.